Well, I don't want to waste any time, so I'm going to dive in. I imagine we might have some more people joining us as we go here, but first of all, good morning. My name is Ellie Burns. I am the Senior Director of Nonprofit Relations here at the Community Foundation, and we're really glad to have you for our second of the four-part Ask the Expert series. And we are excited to welcome Bethany Snyder from Snyder Strategies. Before I introduce Bethany, just a couple sort of housekeeping things. We are recording the first portion where Bethany will be providing some information on advocacy and policy engagement. She'll pause a few times throughout the presentation to take questions. We are going to stop the recording after she's done presenting, and we'll just have some maybe safe space if you've got questions that you might not want to ask in the recording. So feel free to save those if you want to wait till the end. But if you've got like some clarification, check for understanding questions, we'll have space for that throughout. Feel free to have your cameras on. It's more fun when we can see you and chat with you. You can unmute anytime and dive in with questions. Throw them in the chat box. We'll monitor that. Yeah, so without any further talking from me, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bethany. So Bethany Snyder is the founder and president, CEO, all good things of Snyder Strategies. She's got nearly 25 years of experience in communications, advocacy, and public affairs, and brings a deep well of knowledge and a proven track record of success. At Snyder Strategies, they don't just talk about change, they make it happen. I would say that's very accurate. She founded Snyder Strategies to empower nonprofits and social justice organizations to harness their voices, build bold advocacy programs, and drive meaningful impact. On Bethany's website, she's got three words that sort of describe her, and they are strategist, enthusiast, and optimist. And I can wholeheartedly say, from what I know of Bethany, that is incredibly accurate. So thank you so much for being here, Bethany. We are excited to have you, and I will let you take the floor.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I was just talking, I normally am based in Urbandale, Iowa, but I'm currently sitting in a coffee shop in Manhattan, or as my mom would say, Manhattan, Kansas. And I'd say, no, the other one that most people think of in New York City. I'm also on a board of directors. We had our big fundraising event last night here. So I'm excited to join you from over here. So yes, we're going to be talking about advocacy and policy engagement, turning purpose into power, advocacy tips for nonprofits. And we can go to the next slide. And I know that Ellie gave a little bit about me, but I refer to myself as an advocacy strategist, enthusiast, and optimist. I really wholeheartedly believe I still believe in our democratic process and that its ability for us to make change and really improve people's lives. And so I like to tell people I've been on all sides of the advocacy desk. I've been a grassroots advocacy director, and I name names. I worked for the American Heart Association in Minnesota and Iowa. I helped pass the Clean Indoor Air Act here in Iowa in the early aughts. I guest lecture at universities, and I love talking about this because I tell the students, you could be sitting right here in this lecture hall smoking a cigarette with like an ashtray hooked to your seat, and how that just shows the power of advocacy and how it changes our culture. So I did that. I was a lobbyist for senior healthcare housing nonprofit. The biggest takeaway from being a lobbyist, I was a lobbyist for one session, is that I never want to be a lobbyist again. So I have no qualms about throwing lobbyists under the bus and talking about them and dishing on them. So I'll be doing that. I was a healthcare consultant. I helped implement Obamacare programs in California. I was a communication strategist for a national organization working to end homelessness. But most notably, I'm a former United States Senate staffer. I worked for Senator Al Franken during his first 5 years of office. I lived in Minnesota for 15 years before making my way back to Iowa. And yeah, so I sat across the desk from hundreds of advocates just like you. And that's why I started my business, because you guys, couple things. Even though I came from the nonprofit world into the senator's office, so nonprofits knew how to get a hold of me, still very few nonprofits reached out to me during one of the biggest healthcare bills of our lifetime, right? The Affordable Care Act. And then I also, when I sat across from organizations, I thought, oh my God, they're really bad at this. They need someone to teach them how to do this better. And so that's what I dedicated my business to, is teaching nonprofits how to do advocacy. So I'm just going to do a really quick 30,000 foot kind of like, where are we at in the world today when it comes to advocacy and politics and policy in the nonprofit space. Hopefully you are a member of the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance. And if you're not, I'm not sure what you're doing with your life. You need to become one. But I'm also a director of that. We just sent out an advocacy alert this morning about things that are happening today in Washington, D.C. that are going to severely impact your operations as a nonprofit. So I'll try, if I remember at the end, I'll make sure you're signed up for our sector newsletter, which is called the In a Minute. And if you're a member, you get this information sooner and faster than the rest of the sector. But we have gridlock in DC. And this is what I call this the understatement of a century. I moved to DC after I graduated from the University of Iowa. My first job was a job in DC. I worked in off the hill politics, as you say, or off the hill advocacy. I worked in different nonprofit organizations, 501c3s. And that was in the early aughts. And I remember when I first moved there, the young people would go out for happy hour all the time. And I remember going out for happy hour with my colleagues who worked on the Hill. And I was like, it's not like it used to be, Bethany. The health committee staff used to get together and go out for happy hour, no matter what side of Iowa you are. And that's just not happening anymore. And that was 20 years ago. And it's just gotten worse. And we see a lot of that partisanship coming into our states and local level, but there's still much more opportunity to make change at the state and local level. And I'll tell you about what those opportunities create for nonprofits. There's a lack of institutional knowledge and subject matter in Capitol Hills across the country, in our Capitol Hill, in our state house here in Des Moines, in city councils, in county commissioner's office. Even on our federal level, who had smart policy people like me working for them, you can't know everything about every policy issue. So when I worked for the senator, my policy portfolio was healthcare, children's issues, seniors issues, nutrition, because we had a farm bill reauthorization, the nutrition programs, and then LGBTQ outreach. And then I got added on arts and culture because I was so awesome. And I'm a smart person, but I can't, even within healthcare, I had to know everything from pediatric dentistry to insurance markets, to medical device industry, to NIH funding, to behavioral mental health care, right? I can't know all that. My job was to know who are the experts in the community. And I want you on speed dial. I want these staffers to be calling you, and I want our state legislators to be calling you when they have a question. And there's just a lack of subject matter expertise in these policy making bodies. And there are some big policy challenges and the need for lawmakers to respond to their voters. And they need to have access to credible information that nonprofits have in spades. All right, so we'll go on to the next one. And so just like other sectors, like the nonprofit sector, like our communication sector and journalism sector, advocacy is evolving. From when I started advocacy 20 years ago, it has evolved, I think, for the better. It's much more transparent. There's increasing pressure on lawmakers to respond to their voters. There's much more ways to interact with your lawmakers, and I think that's good. I think many of our lawmakers don't think that's good, and they're kind of annoyed by it, but that's the process. And they need credible factual information from their communities and districts. And they're in search of examples that help explain these complex policy issues. And they need to understand the impact of these policy decisions or the lack of policy decisions on their community and specific populations. And you'll see this theme that I'm talking about. These are all things that nonprofits have in spades at your fingertips. We go to the next slide. And I refer to them as the 4 nonprofit advocacy superpowers. These are things that all advocacy organizations wish they had that nonprofits just have automatically. And we are not using and leveraging them. And it just blows my mind every single day. And so I'm going to talk about those 4 nonprofit advocacy superpowers. So we'll go to the next. The first one is, I mentioned this, subject matter expertise. I guarantee that if you talk to any lawmaker today, you know more about your issue than they do, unless they happen to have worked for your organization or in the same sector. You know more. You know all those grant reports, and sorry, Ellie, that those, the foundations make you write that are so, tedious and roll our minds. They are chock full of information that you can share with your lawmakers. So you can be thinking about how can we repurpose these tedious, grant reports that we have to write twice a year or once a year and turn them into something that we can share with our lawmakers. Those annual reports, chock full of information for your lawmakers. You have subject matter expertise. You just heard me say I was a healthcare staffer for a senator. I still do not consider myself a subject matter expertise when it came to medical device industry, compounding pharmaceuticals, um, school-based mental health care. And these are all bills I worked on in the Senate. He needed to know who are the experts in my community that I need to reach out to, right? The second thing is you have access to localized data and information. You have a pulse on what's going on in your community. And this is things that our lawmakers need and want. They don't have research shops. They don't have polling shops. They don't have all these things. You know, you guys have not only, you might have it in actual data, but you definitely have it in what your staff sees on the ground every single day. You have stories from people with lived expertise, people whose lives are impacted by bad policies, good policies every single day, right? You see the effects of good policy and bad policy every single day. And notice I said people with lived expertise. I consider this an expertise. People hire me for my expertise. We should be, and I do a whole other presentation on this, but you should be paying people when you use their stories, just like if you're paying a consultant for their expertise. That's a whole nother, that's ethical storytelling. That's a whole nother workshop. But you have stories from people who are living these things every single day. And most importantly, you have access to people who care and are motivated to act. These are the four superpowers that does pharma have? Do corporations have? Right, all these people that are trying to make policies on the Hill, and nonprofits have them at spades and in their fingertips, and they are the key to having amazing advocacy programs. We'll go to the next slide. So we'll talk about people. Again, you have access to people. You have access to people, and it's really about voters and constituents, right? Our lawmakers think to themselves, what would my voters want me to do when a bill comes in front of them? And if they're not hearing from you, believe me, they're hearing from other people, right? Lawmaking and policy is the world of the squeakiest wheel gets the oil. I mean, that's what it's about. That's the whole thing. So you have access to people, and we're going to talk about who those people are. So let's talk a little bit what advocacy is and what it's not. This is things where nonprofit people get really tripped up in. So we'll go through this. So we're going to talk about what's holding nonprofits back from engaging in advocacy. And I'd love to hear from you. If you have any thoughts on this, just a really quick, like throw them in the chat. What holds you back from engaging in advocacy? Why aren't you engaging, right? Or why are you not, maybe you're just starting to dip your toe in it. What's holding you back? I'd love to hear, just throw some things in the chat. Yeah, what's holding nonprofits back from engaging? There's no wrong answers.
I'll start, Bethany. I'd say maybe one of the things that I see might be holding individuals back is like they don't know where to start.
Yep, don't know where to start. Absolute lack of defined roles. That's interesting, Marge. Seems intimidating. Yes, those are all things. We'll go to the next slide. One of the things that nonprofits do often is they equate or conflate advocacy with politics. Advocacy is not politics. And we're going to talk about that. Especially in the eyes of the IRS and your 501c3 status, advocacy is not politics. Yeah, what C6s can do versus C3s versus C4s versus PACs, right? All of that. So advocacy is not politics. Now, of course, you need to take into the political environment, you know, your advocacy campaign, and many issues are politicized, but advocacy is not politics. I'll go on to the next slide. What is politics? You know, we call these in the advocacy world, big P politics. Politics in the eyes of the IRS are very narrowly defined, very narrowly defined. There are three things: political parties, candidates, and elections. That's it, you guys. As long as you stay away from talking about political parties, candidates, or elections, you can talk about your issues. That's what politics is. That's what your 501c3 status says you cannot engage in. You can, and we're going to go through examples here in a minute so you can get some practice identifying this. Now, notice elections has a little asterisk by it because nonprofits can engage in election work. We call it democracy building work, voter education, voter registration, get out the vote, things like that. And there's lots of great research, and I'll do a whole workshop on that, on when nonprofits engage in those things, we actually have a more equitable electoral. We see that people of color, LGBTQ people, and people with lower economic statuses tend to vote more when nonprofits get engaged in that democracy building activities. But again, as long as you don't say the Republicans or the Democrats or this candidate or that candidate thinks this way or that way, and we agree with them, you are fine. And currently, we're not in any election cycle right now. Now, some people have started announcing themselves for governor or members of Congress. Well, right now we're not in an election cycle. And so there's not really candidates. So you're saying, okay, can I invite, what about Rob Sands? Or if people are still sitting lawmakers, they're still sitting lawmakers. They're still having electoral duties to their constituents. So we'll get more into these little gray areas in a bit. But basically, if you stay away from political parties, candidates and elections, you are fine. Next slide. Okay, so looking at these issues, let's look at these. Which of these issues are political, big P political? Which of these issues are things that nonprofits should not talk about or should not educate about?
I think Bethany might have froze for a minute.
And you can get it off mute. Say, you would get your times. And these are all things emphasized. Vaccine and masks. When I used to give this presentation, no, you can talk about reproductive rights and LGBTQ issues. I sit on the board. One Iowa is a 501c3. They talk about that all the time, right? Planned Parenthood has a C3. I always find this so fascinating because I started my advocacy career in Washington, D.C. So I went to the University of Iowa, and then I moved to D.C. as my first job out of college. I was so naive, you guys. The only time I'd been to D.C. was on a family vacation once and on a school trip. And I can tell you, my first 5 years of doing advocacy, do you want to know how many people said in DC, nonprofits can't do advocacy? Zero. I never heard that. I never heard that once. I had no idea it was a thing that nonprofits had until I moved out of DC to go to Minnesota to get my graduate degree. And that's when I started hearing this. And I was like, what is this? This is like the biggest conspiracy theory I've ever heard. I just did 501c3 advocacy for 5 years and not one person talked about this. And you move out of DC and all of a sudden it was just like blew my mind. But no, you can talk to all of this. I want to point to vaccines and masks, fire hydrants as my example. Maybe someday people will politicize fire hydrants. I don't know. Maybe all the other ones are really bad and have tracking devices in them. And they're just trying to track us. I don't know. Who knows? That might come up next year. Nothing surprises me anymore. But if you would have told me 6 years ago, 10 years ago that a mask would become a political symbol, I would have like laughed in your face, right? But no, these are all things that nonprofits can talk about. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, we have we can go. Another thing that up is that advocacy does not equal lobby is lobbying. And that's another thing. And 501c3s can lobby. Again, I have only worked for 501c3s. I was a lobbyist for a 501c3. I've only done 501c3 advocacy. Now there's our rules on it. There's limits on it. You got to do reporting, just like those reporting your grant money. But 501c3s can lobby. And so again, not all advocacy is lobbying, but all lobbying is advocacy. We'll go on to a next screen. So these are a few advocacy activities that all nonprofits can engage in and all 501c3s can engage in. And you can see there's only one of them that's lobbying. Public education is key, huge. Research, enforcement of current laws. So after we passed the Clean Indoor Air Act in Iowa in 2008, we had many years of just trying to enforce that law, right? And doing a lot of education around it. Commenting on regulation and agency policy, lawmaker education, public opinion polling. I love this one. I love it when nonprofits do this. We need more of this. Relationship building, training and leadership development, attending advocacy training, learning how to advocate, lawmaker education, etc. You can see lobbying is just one of these things in the middle of that. We'll go to the next slide. And lobbying is very narrowly defined. So there's two different kinds of lobbying. There's direct lobbying where you're talking to a lawmaker, and there's what we call grassroots lobbying where you're asking others to talk to lawmakers. And there's a three-part test, and it has to, all three boxes have to be checked for it to be considered lobbying. Are you communicating with a lawmaker? Are you expressing a view, like you need a vote on this bill, yes or no? And is it about a piece of specific legislation? That's it. If it only checks two of these boxes, it's not, it has three. And when it comes to grassroots lobbying, very same thing. You're communicating with the public, expressing a view, you should vote on this, yes or no, about a specific piece of legislation, and includes a call to action. Contact your lawmakers, email them, call them, etc. So we're going to go through a few examples in these next slides. You're going to say whether it's direct or grassroots. And when I was a lobbyist and I used to do this stuff for other organizations, or even as a grassroots lobbyist, I would have a little sticky note on my computer that had this on there. So when I was keeping track of my time, I knew, is this actually lobbying? People think so much more is lobbying than it is. I'm actually, again, I serve on the board of a C4. And I've served on the board of a C3 that does advocacy as well. And I remember one of our other board members said, well, what about when our director of advocacy is sitting in committee hearings, or think about all the time they spend at the Capitol? I'm like, that's not lobbying. If you're sitting in the cafeteria of the Capitol on your computer, you're not lobbying. If you're in a committee hearing, listening to the lawmakers debate a bill, you're not lobbying. Now, if you stop those lawmakers as they walk into the committee hearing and say, hey, please vote yes or no on this bill, that 5 minutes is lobbying. The hour and a half you're sitting in that committee meeting, that's just listening. It's not lobbying. Now, if you testify, that's another thing, but we're not going to get into that. We'll go to the next slide. So we'll practice this so you guys can. So here we're going to do three little examples, and you're going to say whether it's direct lobbying or grassroots lobbying, or if it's none. So this is a letter that I wrote to Representative Smith on the behalf of Doing Good Nonprofit. Yeah, that we want to have nap pods and snack robots for the nonprofit sector. So we're asking this representative to support HF 252. So yeah, tell me, is this direct lobbying, grassroots lobbying, or neither? Lobbying direct, that's right, Joe Parrish. Because you're communicating with a legislator, your expresses a view, you said vote yes on a specific piece of legislation. It's that easy, you guys. You all go register's lobbyists now. Go do your thing. Let's go to the next slide. I know lobbyists, they act like they have a special, not special. Okay. The legislature is about to vote on the snack robots and nap pods. This is a social media post. Call your legislators today and tell them to vote yes on this. Let's support the people who support our communities. What is this? Is direct lobbying? Is this grassroots lobbying? Or is this not? Joe's on fire. It is grassroots lobbying, right? So we're communicating with the public via social, or this could be on a billboard. This could be an ad. You're communicating with the public that expresses a view, vote yes, on a specific piece of legislation, HF 252, and includes a call to action. Call your legislators. Again, if it doesn't hit any of these, it's not considered lobbying. We'll go to the next one. So you're at a wellness fair, you're at a community fair, and you see a lawmaker, they're doing a panel, and you stand up and you say, study shows that healthier workplaces like snack robots and nap pods boost employee productivity. Nonprofits are doing their part. It'd be great to see public investment in this too. Is that lobbying? Is it grassroots lobbying, direct lobbying, or not? Right, Sherry, it's not lobbying, right? We didn't mention any bill. We were talking to a lawmaker. We did express a view. We didn't even mention a specific bill. So we didn't even express a view on that bill, right? We didn't say vote yes or no. So this is an example of not lobbying. All right.
Hey Bethany, we're having a little issues with your video coming in and out. I'll message you here.
So another nonprofits have, can I do that? Is that good? I can just shut off
Yeah,
my
we can
video.
hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's
All right,
okay.
perfect. Well, let's do that. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So one of the things I want you to think about is when you think about advocacy, just like the rest of anything you do, it's about bringing people closer to your mission. I consider advocacy another way for stakeholder engagement. It's another way to bring people closer to your mission. We'll go to the next one. So the power of the grassroots, right, is when one of these little fishies could not take out the shark by itself, right? But if we all get together, we all work together, all these little fishies can take out the shark. And that's what I think the power of grassroots is. Go to the next one. And sometimes people come to me, they're like, who do we have? Who can we engage? Well, first of all, you have built-in advocates right now. These are folks inside your organization. Staff, I think, are the most amazing advocates. I love taking like frontline staff and fundraisers to talk to their lawmakers. It's so interesting. They just like, it's amazing the stories they have. Your board of directors. Let me tell you this, you guys. I guarantee no matter what kind of nonprofit you run, your board of directors give politically. I don't care. I would bet lots of money. And if I looked at any of your board of directors and I looked up their giving to candidates, at least one of them has given politically, for sure. They're already in the game. You're just not leveraging those relationships. And board of directors, just like lawmakers, they have egos. They love to tell you who they know and who they don't know, right? And then you have donors and volunteer, et cetera. We'll go, then you have also your built-in advocates outside of your organization. The next slide. You have coalition members, you have other stakeholders, you have volunteers, you have community members, you have all these people who are already invested in your mission that want to engage in advocacy. We'll go to the next one. I'm going to stop here. The next few slides are really just about how to talk to lawmakers, but I just want to stop for a minute and see if you had any questions about some of the content. I'm going through this pretty fast because I want to get to your questions, but. Awesome. All right, well, feel free to throw it in the chat. So again, I just wanted to take the last few minutes just to talk about best practices of working with lawmakers. People really like, again, people are intimidated, et cetera. So we'll go through this. So just remember, when you are the boss, you hire and fire your lawmakers through elections. Now, do not say this to them. They do not like to hear this. This bothers them. But just as this like gives you some gravitas as you're talking to a lawmaker, we fire and hire them through elections. We pay their salaries through taxes. And sometimes our preferred candidate isn't picked or still key part of the process. We've all been on hiring committees, right? We've all have. Just because our candidate isn't picked, does that mean we don't get to come to work the next day? Because the person I wanted didn't become the new admin? No, we still have to show up, work with that person and do the best we can. And that's how I feel about advocacy. Not all these lawmakers I would have voted for, but it doesn't really matter. We don't get to pick who we get to work with, right? And the democratic process relies on your participation. I don't like to do a blame the victim thing, but I've been seeing this over and over again, like the last 6 to 8 weeks. I feel that had nonprofits been engaged in advocacy more, we would not be in the position we are right now, for sure. I guarantee that if the nonprofits had actually flexed their advocacy muscle, right now we have a saying in advocacy, I want you at the table, not on the menu. All nonprofits are on the menu right now. And again, not to blame the victim, but I wonder, had we made more investments in advocacy, would we be in the same position right now, right? We'll go to the next slide. So here's some myths and barriers. I can't contact my lawmakers. People think it's illegal. It's not illegal. It's your constitutional right to and you should be doing it. Now, whether you're contacting a lawmaker on behalf of your organization, that's something you need to obviously talk with your board about, talk with whoever you need to talk about with that. You can always contact your lawmakers as your own individual, right? As a private citizen. Do they even listen or care? I mean, I couldn't get out of bed in the morning if I didn't think they still listened or cared, right? But I don't know, it's the American spirit. I still do, even though they may not listen or care about what I have to say. I do think they're in this as public servants. Now, the last three are various shades of the same theme. My lawmaker is very conservative, very liberal. So it doesn't matter if I contact them. They've already made up their mind to vote about this issue, or they already decide how to vote. So yeah, I always say when it comes to lawmaking or when it comes to, yeah, policy making, it's not over so fat ladies sings. It's not over until they press that button, right? Now, of course, when you're devising advocacy strategies, you're going to think about how to use your resources. But if you as a person, private citizen should always be contacting your lawmakers. I have a couple little examples I'm going to give here. So I've worked a lot in LGBTQ advocacy. And you guys, I'm going to remind you, and some of you might be old enough to remember this, in the 90s, we had lawmakers who literally said out loud, I don't have any gay people in my district because nobody contacted me. We know that is factually incorrect. Gay people live everywhere. But what that meant is that gay people weren't reaching out to the lawmakers, right? We never want to let them off the hook. I never want to hear a lawmaker say, well, you didn't contact me. I didn't know that. Never let them off the hook. Now, even if your lawmaker is in line with what you think, and you're like, oh, I hear this a lot. Oh, well, my lawmaker already agrees with me. Awesome. Call them and thank them. They rarely get thank you calls. And I'll tell you, the ones that we reported to our boss were the ones where he got thanked. So just, and sometimes in the state level, they do this, but not as often, but definitely the federal level, we had interns who tracked all calls and emails into our office. And the next day I got a report that said how many calls we got in different issues, how many emails we got on different issues, so we could tell what was popping. Again, I have so many examples of lawmakers whose minds have been changed by constituent engagement. Just a couple of years ago, Senator Joni Ernst voted in favor of the Respect for Marriage Act. Again, if you would have said that was not on accident, you guys, that did not happen because she was just enlightened one day, or maybe she was enlightened one day, but it was because of advocacy that people like me did, right? And we had heard intelligence that she was thinking that her mind hadn't been made up. And so we didn't let that go. And we contacted her, and LGBTQ folks reached out to her. Again, if you would have told me 8 years ago that Joni Ernst would have voted positively on a pro LGBTQ bill, I would have fallen over. But it just shows you that we did not give up and we did not write her off. Okay, next one. Obviously, if you get a chance to meet with a lawmaker, be personal and professional. We're just at work. Just don't, you can get more bees with honey or something than you can with vinegar or whatever the saying is. I see lots of bad behavior from lawmakers too. So I just want to say that it's not just all in the constituents. Lawmakers are also bad human beings also often also. But just we're at work. And sometimes like I'm really fired up about an issue. I'm not always the best messenger. Sometimes I have to say, you know what, I'm gonna sit this out. I can't, I can't cool my jets for this one or whatever it is, right? And it's okay to say that. Share your story, but be succinct, be mindful of time. There's always going to be time constraints, whether they have other meetings, they're going to be pulled back onto the floor to vote, whatever it is. Always expect you're only going to have 5 minutes. If you have more than that, you're lucky. Do basic research about your target. Find out how they voted about this. How have they voted on this in the past? Do they have something in their background or from an industry they're from that can help you clue you in on how they're going to vote, right? Kind of go in there knowing stuff. Ask questions of the staff or a lawmaker. This is like, I think the most underutilized tip is, so let's say your lawmaker is totally on the opposite page of you and is not going to vote for you. Vote how you want. Ask them questions. How are you thinking about this issue? Who else are you listening to? My favorite one is, do you have any flexibility to change your mind? No one loves to say no to that, right? Everyone loves I'm sure they have a very open mind. So it's always great to ask those questions, be patient, always say thanks, and last people, always make the ask. When I worked for Senator Franken, if I knew he was not going to vote in the same way they wanted him to, I did not bring that up and volunteer that information. If they did not ask me, I would sit there the whole time saying, I hope they don't ask me how he's going to vote on this. And if they didn't ask me, I didn't bring it up. I said, thank you so much for coming here. I would share this with my boss. I appreciate your advocacy, right? But always make the ask. Say, can we count on you or can we count on your boss to vote this way? And then you guys, this is $40,000 in student loans, graduate school loans. Then you just stare at them and you count to 5 hippopotamus and don't say anything. They're going to say something. They might not answer the question right away, but they're going to say something. So just give them space to say something. Okay, you guys don't have to go to public policy grad school anymore. I'll just share that with you. Okay, next slide. This is the last one. What doesn't work? Being confrontational. Again, I see a lot of bad behavior from lawmakers. Lying. I don't say lying on purpose, but sometimes they'll ask you a question, like a policy question. They need to know something, and you just purported yourself as a subject matter expert. If they ask you a question, you don't know the answer, just say, that is a great question. I don't know the answer. Let me get back to you. Contacting lawmakers that don't represent you. There's some some very narrow circumstances, if they're chair of a committee, if they represent people in your service area. Obviously in Iowa, there's only one chance that we have to provide public comment, and that's in the subcommittee level where there's only 3 lawmakers. So likely they're not going to be ones that represent you, but that's the only time they take public testimony. And then obviously contacting administrative offices, don't do that. They can't take they don't have the means to take constituent engagement. Follow the channels, write a letter to them, ask your lawmaker to contact them, or meet with agency staff.